When the seventh-dimensional ship faced the eighth, reality itself begged for mercy. The awakening of impossibilities. Captain Zephyr Voss stood on the bridge of the Paradox Weaver, her hands dancing across controls that existed in 17 different probability states simultaneously. The seventh-dimensional vessel hummed with impossible harmonics, its crystalline hull refracting not light, but the very concept of illumination itself. "Status report, Nix," she called to her navigator, a woman whose eyes held the depth of collapsed stars and whose thoughts moved through quantum superposition like poetry through a dreamer's mind. Nix's fingers traced patterns in the air, manipulating streams of causality that flowed around them like luminous rivers. "We're riding the edge of a temporal cascade, Captain. The multiverse is unsettled here. Something has been disturbing the deeper layers." Through the viewport, if it could be called that, stretched a landscape of fractured time and space. Fragments of reality drifted past like broken mirrors, each one reflecting a different possibility, a different truth. Some showed worlds where mathematics was blue, others where gravity fell upward, and still others where love was a fundamental force stronger than any nuclear binding. "Flux, how are our engines handling the dimensional stress?" Voss turned to her chief engineer, a being who existed partially in several dimensions at once. Flux Meridian was more concept than person, their form shifting between states of matter and energy and pure thought. "The probability drives are stable, but Captain," Flux's voice resonated with harmonics that made reality shiver. "I'm detecting something that shouldn't be possible. There's a signature approaching from the eighth dimension." The bridge fell silent. Even in the seventh dimension, where impossibility was merely another tool in their arsenal, the eighth dimension was forbidden territory. It was the realm of things that not only didn't exist, but couldn't exist, concepts so alien that even thinking about them could damage reality itself. Nix's expression grew troubled, her consciousness touching the edges of probability streams that suddenly felt poisoned. "Captain, it's not just approaching, it's descending. Whatever it is, it's forcing its way down through the dimensional barriers." Voss felt a chill that went deeper than her bones, deeper than her soul. In her years commanding the Paradox Weaver, she had faced temporal storms that could age a star to death in seconds, navigated through regions where cause preceded effect, and even survived encounters with beings made of pure entropy. But this was different. "Can you get a visual on it?" she asked, though part of her hoped the answer would be no. Nix closed her eyes, her consciousness expanding outward like ripples on a pond made of time itself. When she opened them again, they were filled with a terror that made the quantum foam around them recoil. "It's not a ship, Captain. It's an architecture of absence, a structure built from the spaces between atoms, between thoughts, between heartbeats." Her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "And it's heading straight for our reality layer." A Paradox Weaver shuddered. Not from any physical force, but from the proximity of something that existed in direct opposition to existence itself. On the long-range sensors, a signature appeared that hurt to perceive, not because it was bright or loud, but because it was aggressively nothing. "All hands to dimensional stations," Voss commanded, her voice carrying across 7 layers of reality simultaneously. "We're about to face something that the universe itself will want to forget." As the crew prepared for an encounter that would redefine the very nature of conflict, the fabric of space-time around them began to whisper, in languages that predated meaning itself. The null architect's descent in the spaces between seconds, where eternity compressed into a single breath, something that had never been born began to remember itself into existence. The concept devourer materialized not through any process of creation, but through the systematic erasure of everything it was not. Mortis Caney stood at the helm of impossibility itself, his form a writhing contradiction that hurt to perceive. He was ancient when the first stars learned to dream, old when mathematics was still learning to count. His ship existed as a testament to the power of absolute negation, not darkness, for darkness still implied the absence of light, but something far more fundamental, the absence of the possibility of presence. "Echo void seren." His voice resonated through dimensions that immediately forgot they had heard it. What do the probability engines show us about this layer of reality? His lieutenant materialized beside him, her form shifting between states of existence and non-existence like a quantum ghost learning to haunt itself. When Echo Void Seren spoke, her words deleted meaning as they formed, leaving only the impression of communication behind. The seventh dimension persists here, architect. A ship, the Paradox Weaver. They think they understand impossibility. Her laughter was the sound of mathematics dividing by zero. They craft their reality from paradox and call themselves masters of the impossible. How quaint. Through the viewport of the concept devourer, a window that showed not what was, but what could never be, they observed the Paradox Weaver floating in its sea of crystallized time. To Mortis Caney's perception, the seventh-dimensional vessel appeared as a crude arrangement of possibilities, beautiful in its naivety, but ultimately fragile. They build their ship from contradictions, he mused, his thoughts rippling outward and causing 3 nearby star systems to briefly forget they existed. But we are built from the absence of contradiction itself. We are the space between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats, the silence that exists before the first word of creation. As the concept devourer descended through the dimensional barriers, reality began to strain. The 6th dimension cracked like ice under pressure. The 5th dimension started to forget its own geometry. The 4th dimension, time itself, began to stutter and repeat, creating loops of causality that led nowhere and began from nothing. Echo Void. Seren extended her consciousness, tasting the quantum foam around the Paradox Weaver. Their captain, Zephyr Voss. She carries fragments of something older, 9th-dimensional resonance buried deep in her genetic impossibility. How interesting. Mortis Caney's interest sharpened to a point that could cut through the concept of sharpness itself. The 9th dimension was myth even to him, the theoretical realm where existence and non-existence were merely different words for the same thing. If fragments of that impossible place still lingered in this reality, prepare the null cannons, he commanded. But do not destroy them yet. I want to understand what they are before we unmake them from ever having been. The concept devourer began to hum with anti-frequencies that caused nearby space to forget how to contain matter. Its hull, crafted from crystallized absence, started to phase through the dimensional barriers like a sword through shadow. As it emerged fully into the 7th dimension, the Paradox Weaver detected its presence and began evasive maneuvers that rewrote local physics. But Mortis Caney smiled, an expression that caused several minor realities to cease their existence in pure terror. Let them run, he whispered to the universe, which immediately tried to forget it had heard him. The void has patience, and, when we catch them, I will learn their secrets before I delete them from the memory of existence itself. The 2 impossible ships began their dance of annihilation, while reality itself started to scream. The clash of impossibilities. The first shot fired in the war between dimensions wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a question that reality couldn't answer. The concept devourer launched a barrage of paradoxes so fundamental that space-time began to develop logical contradictions like a computer program encountering infinite loops. Evasive maneuvers, Captain Voss commanded as her ship twisted through probability streams that suddenly led to nowhere. The Paradox Weaver flickered between 17 different states of existence, each one real, each one impossible. Nyx's hands danced across her quantum console, her consciousness splitting into parallel threads of possibility. Captain, they're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to prove we never existed in the first place. Her voice carried harmonics of panic as she wrestled with navigation equations that solved themselves into non-existence. Flux Meridian materialized across 3 sections of the bridge simultaneously, their form stretched thin by dimensional stress. The probability drives are overheating. Whatever they're shooting at us, it's making our own impossibilities doubt themselves. Through the chaos, Captain Voss felt something stirring deep within her genetic code, patterns written in mathematics that predated the birth of logic itself. The 9th-dimensional fragments Mortis Caney had detected began to resonate, filling her mind with concepts that had no names, because naming them would limit their infinite potential. All weapons, return fire, she commanded. Nix, bend causality around their ship. Make their attacks arrive before they fire them. Nix's eyes blazed with quantum fire as she reached deep into the probability matrix. Space around the concept. Devourer began to fold backwards, creating temporal eddies where effects preceded causes and consequences arrived before decisions were made. But Echo Void Seren was ready. She spoke in the anti-language of the 8th dimension, words that deleted meaning as they formed. Temporal inversion detected, implementing null causal barriers. Her voice caused the very concept of sequence to stumble and forget its purpose. The Paradox Weaver's time-bent attacks struck barriers made of crystallized impossibility and simply ceased to have ever been fired. But the attempt had given Flux Meridian the opening they needed. Captain, initiating. Paradox torpedoes. Flux's consciousness split across 4 dimensions simultaneously as they armed weapons that existed in superposition, simultaneously fired and unfired, hitting and missing, deadly and harmless until observed. The torpedoes streaked through folded space, each one carrying a different impossibility. One contained a black hole that thought it was a rainbow. Another held gravity that flowed upward while falling down. The third carried time that moved sideways through Wednesday. Mortis Caney observed their approach with ancient amusement. Clever, he admitted, his voice causing nearby mathematics to develop anxiety disorders. But you still think in terms of what can be. Allow me to demonstrate what cannot. He gestured, and the space around the Paradox Weaver filled with null cannons, weapons that didn't fire projectiles, but rather fired the absence of projectiles, creating holes in reality, where even emptiness couldn't exist. The 2 ships engaged in combat that made physics weep. The Paradox Weaver wove between attacks that erased the possibility of dodging, while the Concept Devourer phased through counterattacks by simply refusing to acknowledge they existed. Captain Voss felt the 9th-dimensional fragments in her DNA beginning to burn with recognition. Whatever she was, whatever her ship really represented, it was more than just another impossible vessel. As Flux rerouted power through probability cascades and Nix bent reality into geometric knots, she began to understand. We're not just fighting them, she realized, her voice carrying across 7 dimensions. We're the universe's immune system. We were created to stop things like this. Echo Void. Seren's laughter was the sound of entropy having an existential crisis. Created? Oh, little captain, you still don't understand. You weren't created. You were prevented from never existing. There's a difference. The battle raged, on each exchange causing galaxies to briefly question their own existence while black holes developed imposter syndrome. But something deeper was stirring, something that would soon force both ships to confront the true cost of their war. Reality had begun to choose sides, and its choice would terrify them both. When dimensions scream. The first sign that something fundamental had broken wasn't the way space began to bleed impossible colors, or how time started hiccuping in reverse spirals. It was the silence, a complete absence of the quantum whispers that normally filled the void between atoms, between thoughts, between possibilities. Captain Voss staggered as the 9th-dimensional fragments in her DNA erupted into full awareness. Memories that had never happened flooded her consciousness. The construction of the Paradox Weaver in foundries that existed before existence, crafted by beings who had transcended the need for reality itself. She saw herself not as she was, but as she had been designed to be, a living key to a lock that should never be opened. Captain, Nix screamed, her voice fracturing across 17 probability streams. The dimensional barriers are collapsing, all of them. Through the viewport, they watched in horror as the 6th dimension imploded into crystalline fragments, each shard reflecting the death of a different mathematical constant. The 5th dimension began to unravel like a tapestry pulled by invisible hands, taking with it the concept of geometric consistency. The 4th dimension, time itself, started to scream. It was a sound that penetrated beyond hearing, beyond perception, beyond the very idea of sound. Time was dying. and its death cry was unmaking the foundation of causality itself. Mortis Caney felt something he had not experienced in eons before the first star learned to burn: uncertainty. The concept devourer shuddered as reality's collapse began to affect even the 8th dimension. His sanctuary of absolute negation was being infected by the chaos below. "This is not possible," he whispered, his words causing nearby space to develop severe anxiety disorders. "The dimensional cascade should not reach us here." Echo Void Seren materialized beside him, her form flickering between states of existence and something worse than non-existence. "Architect, the 7th-Dimensional ship, it's not just immune to the collapse, it's causing it. No, that's not right. It's focusing it." On the bridge of the Paradox Weaver, Flux Meridian had become a living conduit of impossible energies. Their forms stretched across multiple dimensions simultaneously as they tried to contain forces that were rewriting the laws of physics in real time. "Captain, the probability drives are beyond critical. They're not just overloading, they're creating new forms of overload that don't have names yet." Flux's consciousness fragmented as they spoke in 17 different probability states. "We need to shut down, but I don't think we can. I think we were designed never to stop." Captain Voss understood now. The 9th-dimensional beings who had created her ship hadn't built a weapon or a shield. They had built a catalyst. The Paradox Weaver was designed to force reality to make an impossible choice, allow the complete erasure that entities like Mortis Caney represented or evolved beyond the need for consistent existence. Reality was choosing evolution, and the process was agony. Dimensional boundaries dissolved like sugar in cosmic rain. The 3rd dimension began to fold in on itself, creating spaces where up was simultaneously down, left was invariably purple, and straight lines curved through tomorrow. The 2nd dimension started to develop depth, while the 1st dimension learned to sing. Through it all, the two impossible ships continued their battle. But now they were fighting in a universe that was actively rewriting itself around them. Attacks that should have connected passed through targets that existed in grammatical tenses that hadn't been invented yet. Defenses meant to protect instead created new vulnerabilities in dimensions that were being born as they watched. "We have to stop this," Nyx gasped, her navigator's consciousness bleeding across probability streams that were becoming more real than reality itself. The universe can't survive this level of change, but Captain Voss, her awareness now fully expanded into 9th-dimensional understanding, shook her head. "No, Nyx. The universe is surviving. It's us that might not." Mortis Caney reached the same terrible conclusion. His ancient mind, accustomed to the certainties of absolute negation, recoiled from the chaos of infinite possibility. Echo Void. "Seren, prepare the null cascade. If we cannot stop this evolution, we will unmake everything, including ourselves." The final gambit was about to begin, and only one certainty remained. When it ended, the universe would never be the same. The price of victory. In the moment before Mortis Caney triggered the null cascade, Captain Voss made a choice that existed outside the boundaries of choice itself. She didn't decide. Decision implied alternatives, and what she did transcended the very concept of alternatives. She simply became what she had always been designed to become. The 9th-dimensional fragments in her DNA didn't just activate, they remembered. And in remembering, they pulled the Paradox Weaver into a state of existence that was simultaneously real and mythical, present and absent, victorious and defeated. "Flux, Nyx," she called to her crew, her voice now carrying harmonics from dimensions that didn't have numbers. "I need you to trust me one final time. We're going to save the universe by becoming its memory." Flux Meridian's form expanded across all possible states of matter and energy simultaneously. "Captain, the probability engines are reading something impossible. We're not just exceeding maximum parameters. We're exceeding the concept of parameters itself." Nyx's consciousness had stretched so far across the probability matrix that she was seeing the universe from perspectives that didn't exist yet. "I understand," she whispered, tears of liquid starlight streaming down her face. We become the story the universe tells itself about impossibility. Mortis Caney felt the shift and knew, with the terrible certainty of absolute knowledge, that he had been outmaneuvered by beings who had planned this encounter eons before he learned to exist. The null cascade began to charge, drawing power from the spaces between spaces, but something was wrong. The absence he commanded was being filled by a presence that existed in the gaps of his understanding. "Echo void seren," he commanded, his voice fracturing reality one final time. "Execute total erasure protocol. Delete everything, including us." But Echo Void Seren had begun to remember something she had been designed to forget. Her form, built from crystallized absence, started to develop impossible qualities. Hope, wonder, the faint echo of what she might have been before she learned to be nothing. "Architect," she said, her anti-language for the first time creating, meaning instead of destroying it. "I remember now. We were them once. Before we chose negation, we were the dreamers who built the first impossible ship." The truth struck Mortis Caney like a paradox resolving itself. The concept devourer and the paradox weaver were not enemies. They were the same ship, split across dimensional barriers by an ancient choice between infinite possibility and absolute negation. They were fighting themselves, and the universe had been waiting for them to remember. Captain Voss extended her consciousness across all dimensions simultaneously, her awareness touching every atom that had ever existed, and every thought that had never been thought. "It's time to go home, Mortis. It's time to remember what we were before we forgot how to be." The null cascade and the probability drive synchronized, not in opposition, but in harmony. The weapon that could erase everything, and the engine that could create anything merged into something that transcended both creation and destruction. Pure potential. Reality stopped screaming. In the sudden silence, dimensions began to heal, but they healed differently. The universe remembered that it had once been a story told by impossible beings in ships that sailed through dreams, and in remembering, it became more than it had ever been. The paradox weaver and the concept devourer didn't destroy each other. They didn't even merge. They transcended, becoming something that existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the silence between words. Captain Voss, Mortis Caney, and their crews became legend, not in the sense of being remembered, but in the sense of becoming the stories that reality tells itself when it needs to remember what impossible means. They exist now in every paradox, every moment when something that cannot be somehow is. The universe continued, forever changed by entities it could no longer perceive but would never forget. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between seconds, space-time itself whispers stories of ships that sail through dreams and crew who chose to become the memory of impossibility itself. In saving reality, they had become its most beautiful secret, a reminder that sometimes the only way to win is to become the victory itself.